The point man slipped, went down, and the whole team stopped behind him. Rick Ogden was only a few steps back in heavy jungle. The man in front was a Vietnamese Ranger, assigned to Ogden's long-range patrol team, and Ogden remembered him as the kind of point man who seemed to catch everything. This time, he didn't. There were fresh, punji stakes hidden in the ground directly ahead of them, close enough that Ogden later described the distance by pointing across a room. The man at point had been doing exactly the job that was supposed to keep everybody else from finding something like that first. Now he was down, and the ground in front of the team had changed. Not physically. It still looked like jungle, but nobody behind him could treat it as ordinary ground anymore. That is the part of this story I want to stay with, because men who walked point in Vietnam were not simply the first man in a file. They were doing a separate job while everybody else was trying to do theirs. The men behind could watch the tree line, keep their spacing, carry the radio, watch the flanks, keep track of the man ahead. The point man had to do all of that, while also deciding whether the next few feet looked wrong. And wrong was not always something big. David Michalak, an infantryman with D Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry, later described learning to notice subtle disturbances in the earth along trails. Other point men remembered watching for a branch that had been moved, vegetation that did not sit naturally, a footprint that did not belong, or a piece of ground that looked just a little too clean. Different units did it differently. Different terrain forced different habits. Some point men worked well out in front. Others stayed closer, depending on visibility, contact, and what the patrol leader wanted. Robin Bartlett, who led infantry in EB Corps, remembered point and cover men sometimes moving 25 to 50 meters ahead of the main body, in terrain where a single file was about the only practical way through. That distance mattered. If the point man saw something, the column had room to stop. If he missed it, the problem was already inside the patrol. Ogden had learned that long before the day with the punji stakes. His first combat mission in Vietnam had started with another point man disappearing from view. That man was named Gigliotti. Ogden's team had been inserted late in the day, which he remembered disliking because darkness left little time to find a place to settle. They were moving through jungle before Tet in 1968 when Gigliotti, walking in front of Ogden, suddenly vanished. No warning. 1 second he was there. The next second, he was below ground level. He had dropped into a small concealed fighting position covered with a mat. Ogden pulled him out. And then the situation got worse, because the hole was not sitting by itself in empty jungle. The team had come into an enemy base area. That earlier incident is useful because it tells you something about point work that a list of booby traps never will. The job was not to identify one particular threat. The job was to recognize when the ground, the vegetation, the trail, or the pattern in front of you stopped making sense. Gigliotti disappeared because a covered position did not look like a position until he was in it. Months later, Ogden was moving with a different man at point, and the same basic problem came back in a different form. By then, Ogden had been in Vietnam for about 11 months. He had joined the Army in 1966, gone through airborne and ranger training, and arrived in Vietnam in September 1967. He had been assigned to the 101st Airborne and then volunteered for a newly formed long-range patrol outfit. These were small teams. That alone changes the way you hear the word point. On a large formation, one man going down is serious. On a small patrol team, one man going down can remove a major part of the team's ability to move, observe, communicate, or get out. Ogden said he had resisted taking the Vietnamese Ranger who was assigned to him. Then, he worked with the man. His opinion changed. He later said simply, he didn't miss a thing. That is about as strong a compliment as you can give a point man. Not that he was fearless, not that he was fast, that he noticed things. A good point man could make the rest of a file feel as if the trail had already been looked at before they reached it. The men behind still watched their own feet. but somebody ahead was reading first. That is what broke when the Ranger slipped. Ogden's account does not describe some dramatic collapse of a large covered pit. He remembered fresh punji steaks hidden in heavy jungle immediately in front of them. The Ranger slipped and was injured badly enough that he could not continue. Ogden had another Vietnamese man with him who could speak English. That man helped him understand what the Ranger needed. The team stopped. A movement problem became a medical problem, and the point man was no longer the point man. Ogden called for a helicopter. This is where the story changes again. The aircraft came out and took the injured Ranger away. If you only tell the incident as a point man hit punji steaks, that sounds like the end. For Ogden, it was not. He later said he made a critical mistake after that evacuation. He believed he should have pulled the entire team out. His reason had nothing to do with the wound itself. He thought the team was compromised. That is the important change. A patrol can lose confidence in a piece of ground and still move. A long-range patrol that believes the enemy may now know where it is has a different problem. Ogden did not extract the whole team. The mission continued, and the next day, the consequences arrived from an entirely different direction. Before we go there, I want to ask something very narrow, because the veterans watching will know how much this varied. If you walked point, covered a point man, or led patrols in Vietnam, what was the first small thing that made you slow everybody down when a trail still looked clean? A footprint, cut vegetation, a smell, a change in the dirt, something about the birds, something your unit taught that another outfit never mentioned. I am especially interested in the differences between units and areas, because those details are exactly where the broad histories usually go flat. Ogden's own story already shows that there was no magic system. One point man fell through a covered position, and the team landed inside an enemy base area. Another point man impressed Ogden for months, then missed fresh steaks close enough to stop the team cold. And there was another layer to this that men in Vietnam carried on their feet. Jungle boots changed during the war. Later patterns included spike protection in the sole, a direct response to the kind of threat soldiers were encountering on the ground. That protection mattered, but it did not make the trail safe. The point man still mattered. The eyes still mattered. The pace still mattered. And a patrol could not stare only at the dirt, because the man at point was also the man most likely to meet whatever was waiting farther ahead. That is one reason point men are remembered so clearly by the people who followed them. They controlled the speed without formally controlling the patrol. When the point man slowed, everybody behind him had to read that change. When his hand went up, the file stopped. When he moved again, the file moved. Nobody needed a speech. The rhythm of the column came from the man in front. After the Ranger was evacuated, Ogden no longer had that same man in front of him. The next day, Ogden and another American on the team, a man named Morrow, were in position when things went wrong. Morrow fell asleep. An enemy soldier got close. Both men were shot. Ogden was hit in the chest. Morrow was badly wounded. Their communications were also in trouble, and Ogden had to work through another position to get word out. The exact mechanics of that firefight are a different story, but one fact reaches straight back to the point man who had gone out the day before. The same helicopter crewman who had evacuated the Ranger learned that Ogden's team was now in trouble. Weather had made the evacuation difficult. Ogden remembered being told that normal support was not going to come. Then, the situation changed. The man connected to the previous day's evacuation heard what was happening and came for them. Ogden never forgot that. Think about the chain for a second. Day 1, a point man misses something hidden in the jungle and is taken out. Ogden keeps the team in the field, even though he later believed they should have left. Day 2, Ogden's team is hit. The man who had carried the point man out the day before becomes part of the reason Ogden and Morrow get out too. The punji steaks did not cause the next day's attack. Ogden never claimed they did, but the 2 days remained connected in his memory because one decision changed who was available, where the team stayed, and who later recognized their call for help. That is a much more useful way to understand patrol work than pretending a good point man could make the jungle predictable. He could not. What he could do was improve the odds for the men behind him. And sometimes the smallest failure in that system changed the whole patrol. There is another detail here that I think older infantrymen will recognize. After a hidden threat is found, the problem is no longer just the object that was found. It is everything around it that has not been checked yet. The next 5 feet, the edge of the trail, the place where a man wants to step while helping somebody else, the route back to where the file was standing. A patrol that had been moving at a steady pace can become a group of men waiting on one safe foot placement at a time. That slowdown is not dramatic on a map. On the ground, it changes everything. Spacing closes if men bunch up. Spacing opens if somebody freezes. The radio man may need to move closer. A leader who is watching the route is suddenly dealing with evacuation. The point man, the person who had been converting unknown ground into usable ground, is gone. Now, somebody else has to become first. I would be careful about claiming that every unit handled that moment the same way, because they did not. Some men had dedicated point men. Some rotated the job. Some trusted a particular man because he was unusually good at reading ground. Some used scouts or local personnel when available. Some point men wanted the job. Some absolutely did not. What matters in Ogden's account is that this particular ranger earned his trust. Ogden started by not wanting him. Then he watched him work. Then, after nearly a year in Vietnam, the only fresh punji steaks Ogden remembered encountering took that man out of the patrol. That is why the story sticks. It is not really about bamboo. It is about confidence. A few minutes before the slip, Ogden had a man in front of him who didn't miss a thing. A few minutes after it, the team was stopped, calling for an aircraft, and Ogden was deciding whether the entire mission should end. That is a real before and after. The trail did not announce it. There was no explosion, no warning from the radio, no big change in the weather or the map. One man went down, and the meaning of the ground changed. There is something else in Ogden's recollection that deserves attention. He did not tell this as a story about the ranger making a stupid mistake. That is important. He praised the man. He emphasized how good he was. He emphasized that the stakes were fresh and hidden in heavy jungle. In other words, the lesson he carried for decades was not, "Our point man failed us." It was closer to the opposite. A man who was very good at the job could still be caught. That is a harder truth. And I suspect it is one reason veterans tend to talk about point men with such specific respect. The position punished overconfidence, but it also punished simple bad luck. The man in front had to make hundreds of small judgments that nobody behind him would ever notice if he got them right. That is a strange kind of competence. Success looks like nothing happening. The patrol keeps moving. Nobody stops. Nobody calls a helicopter. Nobody writes down the patch of ground that looked wrong and turned out to be harmless. The point man only becomes visible to history when something happens. Michalak remembered the subtle disturbances in the earth because he had to learn to see them. Bartlett remembered how far ahead his point and cover men worked because distance was part of the job. Ogden remembered 2 different point men disappearing into things he could not see from behind them. And he remembered the Vietnamese Ranger because the man had earned his confidence before the ground finally beat him. If you served around men who were unusually good on point, I would like the names when you have them. Not a general, "We had some good guys." The name, the unit, and the one practical thing he did that made the rest of you trust him. Those are the kinds of details families cannot recover from an after-action report 50 years later. And if that is the kind of Vietnam history you want this channel to keep doing, the job, the person, and the little detail that explains why everybody else remembered him, subscribe and stay with us. That tells me there is still an audience for these ground-level accounts without turning them into broad war summaries. Ogden's story does not give us the Ranger's name. At least, not in the oral history record I could verify. That leaves an uncomfortable blank in the center of the episode. We know what the man did. We know Ogden did not want him at first. We know he changed Ogden's mind. We know he walked point. We know he was injured and evacuated. We know the evacuation crew became important again the next day. But we do not have the name. So I do not want to invent one, guess one, or quietly turn him into a generic South Vietnamese soldier. Ogden called him a Vietnamese Ranger. That is how we should leave him. The final decision in this story belongs to Ogden. He got the point man out. Then, he kept the team in the field. Years later, he still called that a critical mistake. Not because he had discovered some universal rule about punji stakes. Because in his judgment, the team's situation had changed enough that the old plan no longer made sense. That is the part that reaches beyond the trap. Before the slip, the patrol's problem was the next few feet of jungle. After the slip, the problem was whether they should still be there at all. Ogden stayed. The next day, he was shot, and the pilot connected to the first evacuation came back for the team again. The patrol did continue, just not with the same point man, the same confidence, or the same set of choices it had before that one step went wrong.